Let's talk about the power of story. I know it, you know it, we all know how powerful an amazing story is. Think about the last movie you saw that caused you to really feel something. You remember that story. It told you something about who you were and who the people in that story were. You connected with them. The ability to connect your story to others is an intrinsic part of development and learning, and something that I think we can skip over all too easily as gamers interacting with other gamers in the all too limited medium of MMORPGs and video games in general. So I want to put out a message encouraging you to learn your story from yourself, from people who've known you, to learn your story and to tell it, to learn how to tell it. Tell me your story. One of the weirdest things that I've struggled with, I think this is a very millennial Gen Z problem. I had the privilege of growing up with video games. For me, it was Super Nintendo and eventually N64. I did play the original Nintendo, although I was very young and don't remember it very well. And eventually progressing into PC games, which eventually led into multiplayer and MMOs. But for all these years, I've had trouble integrating the story of myself as a gamer with the rest of the story I have about my life. If you meet a cousin that you haven't talked to in 5, 10 years, are the things you do online part of that conversation? Should they be? I think that in hindsight, one of the important acts of integration I've sort of attempted to bridge the gap between my identity as a gamer and my identity outside of video games, my identity as a husband, my identity as a coworker, my identity as a, I don't know, whatever else, neighbor, is by creating the podcast and by working on this channel. I mean, right? Look at the podcasts that I've done. I had a lot of great conversations with a lot of incredible people about their lives, about their stories, and about how we can learn from those stories. But a story is incomplete if it's not integrated. I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm in the process of interviewing for jobs, between jobs, and one of the things that you have to do in an interview is be able to tell your story. Who are you? What are you about? What can someone expect from you? This is the basis of any relationship, and especially one where money changes hands. So, how do you go about doing this? Well, I mean, over the years, I've learned how to talk about my work experience and how I've gone from being someone who did tech support to background data work to back of house data and ETL to someone who's done more front of house customer centric work again and gone into solutions and on and on and on. But that's just a very small part of who I am. The other part of who I am, disguised by that story, is someone who stopped believing he was an introvert and started to believe he was an extrovert, awoke to my own need to connect with people, to my love for connection with people. And what that means means that when I sit down after dinner at night, I don't think about what video game I'm going to play. I think about who I'm going to call and talk to. It's weird and it's surprising, but it's changing my life the more and more I do it. And there are other stories in my life too. There's a story of Deeg the Gamer, formerly known as Darth Greg. The reason I changed that name is because I had to integrate my gamer story and my personal story at a LAN party. I worked at a startup back in 2015, 16, where they were having an Overwatch LAN. I was like, hell yeah, I want to show up to this. But that was very intimidating to me, to coalesce the gamer part of my personality into the real world people who I work with every day. I did it, and part of the challenge was having to choose a handle that wasn't Darth Greg, because I I'd used that handle since I was 13. I thought it was pretty badass. But at the tender age of, God, how old was I? 30 something? It no longer felt appropriate to go around calling myself Darth Greg. So I took DG and put a sound in between it and came up with Deeg. Um, and that's where Deeg comes from. And I think ever since then, I have been trying to integrate this huge part of my life around gaming and gaming communities and what I've experienced there with everything else in my life. One of the really transformative experiences there that I'm really grateful for is I somehow managed to convince my wife to play Guild Wars 2 with me for a couple years. That was incredible. We had just moved back from overseas and we had nothing. I eventually got a job and got enough scratch together to build my first PC with the idea that I was going to use it to develop my career and learn to code and do all these introverted things that I didn't realize I was going to hate. But anyway, um, secretly, I built this computer to game, which is, of course, when I discovered PlanetSide had a sequel called PlanetSide 2, and Guild Wars 1 had a sequel called Guild Wars 2. And I showed Guild Wars 2 to my wife, who loved Lord of the Rings, but never played video games, and quite frankly thought they might be a little bit evil. She was like, wow, could I play that on my MacBook? I looked it up, and sure enough, she could. And having my wife, the person in my life who knew me best, who cared about me most, suddenly understand what gaming meant to me, what I got out of it, and what was good about it in a visceral, personal way that I didn't have to explain. It was like an enormous sense of permission to be like, okay, I don't have to be ashamed of being a gamer. And I've talked to a lot of millennials like myself, being an old millennial, who feel this way about games, that it's something that they still feel they have to hide about themselves, or something that they have to get over hiding about themselves. Or you talk to younger generations, Gen Z, they don't have this disconnect because gaming and social media and the internet were ubiquitous for their entire lives. And the idea of disambiguating your identity into online avatars and stuff like that was not seen as weird. You think back to like the hysteria of the 90s around Dungeons and Dragons. Well, in the early noughties, it was that way with video games, online gaming too. People saw it as something kind of weird, and maybe there was something wrong with you. And to be fair, maybe there was something wrong with me and the people that I played with. But the point is, we all don't see it that way. Younger generations don't have to carry that burden of guilt the way the older ones do. And it confers a responsibility on us to integrate those experiences. And the result of integrating those experiences is learning my story. A story of struggling with my health, mentally and physically, a story of learning to be a good partner to my wife, a story of contending with the need to have a career and be a value to somebody and figure out how I fit into all of it. And the question of why I feel so compelled, so drawn to these online worlds. What's there for me? Why do I keep going? And how do I make sure that doesn't become a stagnant thing? How do I make sure that my interest in these online worlds takes me somewhere? Because that's the thing about a story, right? A story moves. A story goes somewhere. If you're treading water, if you're spending time being angry or frustrated or stuck, if you're hard stuck playing a game, your story has stopped. And you owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself to figure that out, fix that. I've been stuck many, many times. I have moments of getting stuck on almost any game that I play. I just got over a little hump with playing New World, the Amazon Games MMO. It took a little bit of inward looking and outward seeking to figure out what was bothering me about the experience, but eventually I figured it out. And I realized, oh, I'm not liking this. I can let go of this part of the game and just, if there's anything left for me, I can take it. But if not, it's okay to move on from that. It's okay for us to move on from things, my gamer friends. And in fact, it's expected that we do. But I started this whole line of thinking because I really wanted to ask you what your story is. Who were you when you started playing these games? And who are you today? And what happened to you along the way to make you that way? Has it been good? Has it been bad? Has it been both? It's been both for me. I'm really happy with the person I am today. And something I couldn't say 20 years ago when I first loaded up PlanetSide 1 beta. If you tell me your story, I'll tell you mine. How's that? I'm waiting.